Good morning. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Wissam Al-Salibi. I work with the World Evangelical Alliance. I'll be moderating our panel today. After the overthrow of Libya's President Gaddafi and the resulting power vacuum in Libya, militancy and cross-border conflict are increasingly threatening countries in West Africa and the Sahel region. The insecurity is fueled by poverty, weak governance, political alienation, and climate change. Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Sudan, South Sudan, Cameroon, Libya, Mali, and other countries face tremendous challenges in the coming years. In the recently released Open Doors list of the top 50 countries where it's the hardest to be a Christian today, we read that at least 50 Christians were killed in 2019 in Burkina Faso, a country which has risen faster and farther on the World Watch list than any other country. From 90,000 displaced, Burkina Faso saw over 550,000 internally displaced people in 2019. In this context, the Burkina Faso Federation of Evangelical Churches, which is a member in the World Evangelical Alliance, appealed last October to the international community for assistance to prevent the country from falling into chaos. As for Nigeria, it remains the country where the most Christians are killed every year. Of about the 3,000 deaths that were documented by Open Doors in 2019, 45% of Christians who were killed for their faith happened in Nigeria. This very week, we learned the very sad news that on Monday, the terrorist group Boko Haram executed the chair of the Christian Association of Nigeria in Adamawa State, Reverend Lawan Andimi. In Nigeria, as well as in Burkina Faso, there's an absence of accountability for these crimes, including for the most horrendous crimes. Contrary to Burkina Faso, where the government is too weak to ensure security and rule of law, the Nigerian government seems to be more reluctant, maybe, to say the least, to address the prevailing insecurity and underlying causes, namely between the violence between Fulani herdsmen and the farmers. But we are here at the World Economic Forum, so why are we addressing these issues at the WEF? A cynical answer would be because business is a driver for this violence. There are powerful economic interests, including human trafficking and trafficking of natural resources, that are feeding into this instability. But a more hopeful answer is that the international businesses and the international business leaders have a role to play and have a genuine interest in promoting peace, stability, and cohesion in this region. Over 400 million live in West Africa, and almost 200 million, or more than 200 million, live in Nigeria alone, the most populous country in Africa and the 7th most populous country in the world. Nigeria has the largest youth population in the world after India and China. Burkina Faso has a population of over 20 million. So in business language, these are markets with great potential. So the question that I'll be asking for our panelists today is, how can we work together to prevent the region from sinking into chaos? How can social cohesion be reestablished and religious freedom be ensured? What role should the international community play? And how can international businesses and business leaders partner with local actors to address the socio-political and economic challenges? To answer these questions, I have great pleasure of having on the panel two friends who are very much invested in this region. First, I'll be introducing Ilya Jadi. Ilya is senior analyst on freedom of religion or belief and an expert on the African continent for the Christian advocacy organization Open Doors International. Mm-hmm. Earlier this year and last year, I had the opportunity to work with Ilya on addressing the challenges in Burkina Faso. So I have the pleasure now to give Ilya the floor to give us an initial overview of the whole of the West Africa region before I move to our next speaker and panelist. Ilya, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Wissam. Like you rightfully said in your introduction, Islamic militancy is gaining ground across Africa, the whole continent. If we consider the geography of that continent, we can see how now it's expanding. There's no single region of the continent where you can't find a particular Islamic active group, whether in the West Africa, whether North Africa, whether in the center around Lake Chad Basin or Greek Lakes countries, or whether in the east near the Somali-Kenya border. You can see how militant groups are active. But even the southern region of the continent, south down to Mozambique, now there are militants, Islamic militants active in that area. So it's a warning sign to see there's no particular region of the continent spared by these Islamist activities. So some regions are more affected than others.
Next slide.
The Sahara region is just south down the Sahara. Is this a kind of belt stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean or Red Sea? You will see all the countries located in that area are deeply affected by Islamist militancy. There are a number of Islamic groups active there. All these countries have something, a number of things in common. They are among the poorest in the world, but they are also sharing this Sahara desert, which makes it for these countries very difficult to control their porous borders. So we can see in this area how the attacks are focused, mainly concentrated. This is where the terrorist group are attacking, killing. So it's mostly in central Mali, north and northeastern Burkina Faso, and western Niger. There's a huge concentration of terrorist activities there, killing civilians, but also attacking, targeting military position. Just a few weeks ago, in Niger, my home countries, terrorists attack military position, two military positions. Within a month, they are able to kill almost 200 military personnel, attacking military position. So this is affecting all these countries, like I said, among the poorest. Now we can see a number of groups active in that area. Some of them are affiliated to Al-Qaeda. Others are affiliated with Islamic State. Actually, you have one of them, a coalition called Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. You have another group called Ansar Islam, and a number of small groups operating mainly from Mali, central Mali, northern Mali, and carrying out cross-border raids in Niger and Burkina Faso. So that's a number of groups. But if we go further down to Nigeria, around Lake Chad, again, here we can see how all the countries or this area around Lake Chad Basin region is also affected by Islamic militancy activities due to one particular group known as Boko Haram. So this has dramatically affected the countries. There's a sharp increase of attacks in recent years, particularly last year. And some of the countries are deeply affected, particularly Burkina Faso, starting from 2016, then to particularly last year. Last year was the particularly has a devastating effect on Burkina Faso, but also other countries, so Niger and Mali, like I said. So the impact, the socio-economic impact on these countries is huge. A number of, you can see the casualties in each countries, hundreds of people killed. And according to the UN data, only last year, 4,000 people were killed across that region. Only last year, within 1 year, particularly last year. So the human cost is huge, the socio-economic impact is huge, and like I said, these countries are among the poorest in the world. And this is also affecting schools. In these countries, you see in particular, for example, in Burkina Faso, more than 2,000 schools were forced to be closed in the northern region of the country. It's more than 300,000 children out of school. 300,000 in one country, Burkina Faso. Niger is also affected. Mali is also affected. For years, neighboring countries, so Niger and Burkina Faso, hosted thousands of refugees fleeing from Mali, but now even these countries are affected. So there is a huge displacement of people from one country to another. You can see the number of displaced people, whether in Burkina Faso, in Niger, almost 200,000, in Mali, almost 200,000 again. In Burkina Faso, almost 500,000 people displaced. So economically speaking, these countries are deeply affected. And in addition to that, this Islamist insurgency has created also, affected the social cohesion between population who used to live together. Because the Islamists are attacking and dividing people along ethnic lines, but also religious lines. And that's how Christians are now have become a target. Christians are attacked because who they are. Christians are attacked because this group have a particular ideology, the Islamic ideology. And because of that, they attack, kill Christians because they are Christians. And even moderate Muslims who are not sharing this radical Islamic ideology have also become a target in this area. So the human cost is huge. Economically speaking, the impact is huge. And the social cohesion in that area is now deeply affected. This is a worrying sign. What would happen over years, we don't know. But for now, for sure, all the ingredients of a major humanitarian crisis are now there. It's just a matter of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilya, for the context that you just provided. Now I would like to turn to Nigeria with Pastor Gideon Parumala, who comes from Nigeria to us today. Pastor Gideon is founder of the Parumala Peace Foundation. And since 2010, he's been heavily invested in peace building, social justice, and religious dialogue initiatives in Nigeria. He seeks to be a voice for peacemaking and bridge building in Nigeria's difficult and divisive context. So I have the great honor and pleasure to have Pastor Gideon with us today to share about the situation in Nigeria and about the efforts in Nigeria to counter this the threat of these groups that are provoking on social cohesion and the unity or the cohesion that existed between Muslims and Christians in Nigeria. So Pastor Gideon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Wissam, and thank you. It's a privilege to speak to a section of those attending Davos 2020. Nigeria, as we some observe, is the most populous country in Africa with nearly 200 million people. That means investment opportunities abound just because of the sheer population. But Christians are having a very difficult time in Nigeria today. First, churches are denied certificate of occupancy. What's that? Before you build a church, you need legal status to build that. And those are the papers. And in most of the northeastern part of Nigeria and northwestern part of Nigeria that is predominantly Islam, you don't easily get that certificate of occupancy. Many churches are standing, yes, but most of them do not have the legal papers. And so a state governor could easily take a decision to bulldoze the church, pull it down. And that takes place from time to time in Nigeria. A second also is the fact that Christian churches are burnt down. And this has been going on for the past 3 decades. Not only are Christian churches and their properties burned down, the businesses of Christians are also affected. And that becomes a major concern. And thirdly also is the rise of Islamic fundamentalism in the 80s, which has created an ideology that promotes Islam, and Muslims are indoctrinated to have hatred towards Christians. That is a big issue. So it's no wonder during crisis, when you hear there are some crises taking place in Nigeria, you could actually have Christians and Muslims who have been living together as neighbors. When those crises erupt, the very neighbors will be the same people that will kill their Christian neighbors. Very sad, very unfortunate. But we also have positive stories in which certain Muslims have also acted to protect Christians. And Christians have also acted to protect Muslims. So that's something helpful to share. The fourth thing that's worsening and making life difficult for Christians in Nigeria today is the rise of the Fulani militia. They engage in kidnapping. Because they do that, Christians have to pay lots of money to get their ransom. Now, others are being kidnapped, but it's nowhere compared to the number of Christians that are being kidnapped and lots of monies that are being paid. Now, Boko Haram has split into 2. The one led by Shekau, that has been brutal in killing both Christians and moderate Muslims, and ISWAP rather, which is Islamic State in West African province, that are much more lethal, but they are committed to just killing Christians. Now, corruption affects all, creating unemployment, and all have combined to become risk factors for the wider population. Now, growing insecurity has become an issue in Nigeria today. We no longer feel safe. People can be killed or kidnapped either on the road or in their homes. While I was here, I received news that the daughter of a state commissioner was kidnapped from their house, and they're asking for large sums of money, 5 million naira. Now, Reverend Andimi Lawan, that we some referred to in his introduction, was picked up by Boko Haram in his home on January 2nd, 2020. I happen to have been involved in pushing, both getting 1 or 2 people in government and also the Christian leaders to see that he's released. And to be honest, we all thought he was going to be released. Negotiations was going on. And I was flying here on Monday, 20th of January, I received news that Andimi had been butchered, beheaded, killed by Boko Haram that kept him. That is the Shekau group. So that's the kind of situation that we faced. Now, there are four numbers of factors leading to grave injustices that we have facing Christians in Nigeria today. But some of the factors include religion, ethnicity, economic, and political. However, Christians have become prime targets of these attacks. Now, what are the churches doing about this? The churches, the evangelical churches, are taking steps to bring peace and stability. First, the church prays for the affected areas, prays for the victims. But added to that also, we're seeing some of the churches from all over, from the south and from the central, also moving to gather relief materials to help some of these victims. Some of the church leaders have actually visited some of the crisis areas. I've had the privilege to also visit some of the IDPs, which is the internally displaced persons, and there are lots of them there, to encourage the people and to go with relief materials. Thirdly, also, the church encourages Christians to extend acts of kindness and unconditional love, both to the victims, but also to Muslims. That's something that the church is doing, which is encouraging. Now, what we've also seen is that because of these attacks, most of Christians have moved southwards. Because of that southern movement, it meant relocation, because people have to leave their ancestral farmlands. So some of the Christians in the more safer areas have provided their lands and space for the fleeing Christians to be able to build new homes. But the desire always is to see that those Christians go back. Now, bridge building steps. As Wissam mentioned, our Peace Foundation has been engaged in peace building, very committed, reaching out to Muslims, top Muslim leaders, acting together, and that has helped in some ways. But added to that also, the Christian Association of Nigeria was visited by the president of the Mayati Allah, which is a cultural association of the Fulanis. Ironically, they defend the killings in some ways. But they were able to visit the Christian leader. And we think that this is an opening that the church could actually build on to connect with them and see how we can promote peace. But also added to that also is that I personally was able to give a challenge to the British High Commission to consider visiting some of the crisis areas. And I think it's a great testimony to the British High Commission in Nigeria. They visited 3 states. Kaduna State, a risky visit in July 2019. We were able to go to some of the affected areas, and they met with both communities, the Muslims and the Christians. And it's amazing what those people are going through. Very horrible conditions. And then the British High Commissioner herself went to one of the states in Benue. We were able to also meet with both Muslims and Christians together. And this was in September. And then in December 2019, the High Commissioner with some of the staff were able to visit some of the victims, Christians and Muslims, in Plateau State. So these are some of the things going on. And then I would like to say that Northern Khan has been able to bring both Christians and Muslims, the Fulani militias and the ethnic nationalities, for us to discuss together how to work for peace. And then in Plateau State, just before I came, last week, both Christians and Muslims were trained together on how to be peace ambassadors, and they were inaugurated shortly before I came. Now, how can the international community help us, business leaders? The encouragement is to encourage you to partner with locals to bring stability and peace. Advocacy of this nature is one of the things that is needed. So what WA is doing, Open Doors, and others in bringing about this forum has been most helpful. Now, let me also add by saying that urgent need for promoting peace, which is predicated on justice, is necessary. We're not just asking for peace, but Christians are also asking for justice. I would like to invite the global community to help partner with us so that we could pursue more effectively on our peace-building efforts locally. Christians need to reach out more intentionally to their Muslim counterparts. This is the model of Christ. Christ goes out. He does not wait for people to come. He forgave when he was not even asked. That's the attitude of Christ. Now, we need to promote this peace building because our young people are getting restless and they want to fight back. They want to retaliate. And we're saying to the young people, you can't do that. That's not the model of Christ. And so we need to promote peace because, and the young people say, we have to defend our parents. We have to defend. In fact, one young man said to some of us Christian leaders, if we depended on you, there will be no Christianity in Nigeria. But the problem is this, that there's a thin line between self-defense and revenge. We're trying to help them to have a balance so that we can reach out to our Muslim neighbors. So there are also opportunities that you can help in the humanitarian needs. In hospitals, when we visited some of those places, there were practically no dispensaries there. Something needs to be done to also rebuild some of the homes in order for them to go back to their ancestral homelands. I think when we do this, it would help a great deal if you can join hands with us. I would like to ask that quickly we just watch a short video, just very briefly, and I'll make a comment and close.
Community leaders, including religious, traditional, women, and youth organizations, as well as government officials with political leaders and security agencies, gathered in Kakotan, Kaduna State, in the northwestern region of the country, with one major consideration: to find a lasting solution to the conflict in southern Kaduna.
Now, this is one of our peace meetings. You can see several Muslim leaders, clerics were here. Several Christian reverends, clergy were also here. Government officials were also here. And I would say this, when this peace meeting held on 22nd of July, 2017, there were no further attacks in this particular community until Christmas Eve on December 23rd, 2027. And subsequently in 2018, a lot of attacks in these places have calmed down. But I'm sad to also say that the beginning of this year, 2020, attacks have gone up again in this community. It just needs that we need to do more. And how can the international community help us closely? Engage with our government, as a matter of factly, get the government to own up to take action for these attacks, because the impunity is just unbearable.
Thank you, Pastor Gideon. Thank you for sharing with us about your efforts. Thank you for sharing with us not just only how you engage with the Muslim communities, but also how you engage with our own Christian and evangelical community to promote peace and cohesion and prevent cycles of vengeance. Thank you. Now I would like to turn back to Ilya. So we just spoke about Nigeria, but I would like now to discuss briefly about Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is the country that has seen the worst deterioration in the last year. And our member, Evangelical Alliance in Burkina Faso, member in the World Evangelical Alliance, issued an appeal in October calling for support and aid to prevent the country from falling into chaos. Ilya, I would love to hear from you more about opportunities for peace in this grim context. What are the opportunities for peace and promoting social cohesion in Burkina Faso?
Yeah, like I said, thank you, Wissam. Burkina Faso is one of the three or the Sahel countries mainly affected by Islamist insurgency. So why the particular case of Burkina Faso? Because last year has become a particular one for the history of these countries because of the frequency and of the Islamist attack. And at that point, Islamist groups are even able to carry out attack against military position, killing, inflicting a huge casualty on military personnel. Burkina Faso, for three reasons, we need to consider the situation, what is happening there. First, if we look at the particular position of that country, Burkina Faso has a central position. With regard to that central position of the country, if a militant group eventually succeeded in attacking and overrunning the country, all other countries located further south will be affected. And these countries are said to be predominantly Christian countries. So, namely, we can see Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Ivory Coast. And so far, there is a good reason for us to believe that these Islamist militancies have already a certain presence in that countries. We can remember the kidnapping of French tourists in northern Benin. We can remember also the killing of one Catholic priest last year in February. He was just traveling from northern Togo to Burkina Faso. And very recently, a number of attacks taking place close to Ivory Coast border. So there are already terrorist activities in that area. Southern Burkina Faso is not only the northern Burkina Faso, the eastern region, but even now the south is affected. And all these attacks started as cross-border attack from neighboring Mali. From Mali to northern Burkina Faso, now expanding from the north to west, from the north to east, but down south. At that point, a number of Western embassies eventually issued a warning sign, an advisory statement to their citizens. For example, for the French citizens, Burkina Faso is, most of the country is considered as a red zone, no-go area for French citizens, for example, to travel in that area because of the security reasons. But also, the second reason to consider the situation in Burkina Faso, Burkina has a long history of tolerance. And I would say Burkina is the most tolerant country across the Sahel. Even though it's a predominantly Muslim country, Christians, Muslims, and believers of African traditional religions live in peace, used to live in peace in these countries. But last year, we have noticed this increase of attack. At that point, Christians are attacked, churches attacked, burnt down, church leaders killed, pastors, priests, Catholic priests, and a number. The last attack happening, which took place in the eastern part close to the Niger border, 14 people, believers, worshippers, were killed. We interviewed the widow of one pastor killed in the north part of the Burkina Faso. She is now in an IDP camp. She explained what happened. And she told us it was on Sunday, after the Sunday service, they were on the church yard premises when armed men stormed the premises. And they asked for the men there at that place to come up, starting with the pastor of the church. They asked them to deny their religion, which they refused, and they took them one after another to kill them. All the men there, only one was able to survive. They collected all their Bibles and burned them down. And she was very emotional, telling us the testimony. She said, until now, I am asking why? Why this happened to us? Why these people come up to attack and kill us? Why? And the only reason, she said, is because we are Christians. And that's the story now taking place in Burkina Faso. People are attacked and killed because of who they are, because they are Christians. So it's creating a kind of collective trauma among people in Burkina Faso, because they used to live in peace, but this peaceful coexistence is now undermined, is now challenged, and is a big issue. Like I said, if eventually Burkina Faso fall, all the rest of the southern part of the continent in Benin, Togo, Ghana, Ivory Coast will eventually be affected if they are not already affected. So there's a challenge here. And like I said, all these countries in the Sahel region are among the poorest in the world. All the conditions now of a huge humanitarian crisis are guided, whether in Burkina Faso or elsewhere in Niger or in Mali. So that's why in October, evangelical churches in Burkina Faso call for international community to support them, because the government is doing enough, is doing his best to protect, but they are overwhelmed. The military personnel, they are not well trained or well equipped to deal with the situation. And because of the number of the displaced people, churches are overwhelmed. So there's a need to support the government. There's a need to support local churches already involved and doing their best to support the displaced people, the affected people. But there's also a need to act promptly, I would say, to eventually preserve this culture of tolerance. Burkina Faso has a long tradition. I have been at stayed in Burkina Faso for 2 years. I know this country very well. And it's amazing to see how people accept each other in Burkina Faso. But this is challenged. And this is a big issue, not only for Burkina Faso, for the whole region. Because all these things started somewhere in Mali. And Mali was affected because of what? The situation which started in 2011, the fall of Gaddafi in Libya. One crisis creating another, and another one to another one. So if the international community eventually didn't take the full, the right measure to eventually, because this is a security issue for these countries, but this is about global security. What is affecting these countries eventually may affect the rest of the world. Since the fall of Gaddafi, we can see the flow of migrants crossing Sahara Desert from Niger to Libya, and Libya crossing the Red Sea, Mediterranean Ocean to the southern Europe. This is a global issue. It's about security affecting the Sahel region, but it's also about global security. The whole international community should eventually act promptly to support these countries, because they are among the poorest. They are doing their best to deal with the situation, but they are not well equipped or trained to do it. And the irony is that their resources or rare resources are now affected to support the military effort. And by doing so, what would happen? It means they may have less money to support education, medical facilities, and at the end, it will create a kind of domino effect. Less and less school, which means less and less capacity for the government to eventually create a job, which means this population, mainly youth population, will become more and more vulnerable. Vulnerable to be what? Targeted, recruited by Islamist groups. So there's a kind of domino effect. Next generation, there's a good reason to believe if the international community don't act promptly to support that country, to strengthen the development in that area, it will create another generation or new generation of militant group. Because this militant group, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of power. Now we can see all the ingredients. This poverty has created a fertile ground for the emergence and development of Islamist insurgency. And that's why the Sahel region is the main affected. But what is affecting the Sahel can affect other parts of the country, whether in the east, or we have seen the Great Lake regions, even south down near to the Mozambique now, down to Mozambique is affected. So there's urgency to act promptly to stop that. It's about security for the Sahel. It's about global security.
Thank you, Elia. Thank you, Elia, and thank you, Pastor Gideon. I must say the picture is pretty grim, but maybe this is why we're here, because we do not accept that the picture remains this grim. And this is why we're here, and we're inviting the people here, people at the WEF, to join us in our action for peace and social cohesion. Now, I have a question for both of you regarding the government. People might ask here, should we partner directly and go to churches or to local organizations, or should we partner with the government? How do we go about? Is the government, we spoke a lot about the armed non-state groups that are causing all this havoc and problems, but is the government helping or not helping? I picked up on a few parts of the answer, but I also want to know if businesses want to be more involved. How can they be involved in a way that would encourage better government involvement? Do they circumvent the government or no? If some of you said that the government might not be willing or is not helpful, I don't know. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you, Wissam. I'll just say that, frankly, for the government, I've said this before, but I want to restate it here afresh. The government of Nigeria is not doing enough. As a person, I can't imagine having a government in place and those number of people, your citizens, are being killed almost on a daily basis. They're being picked up from the roads, from their homes. Whole communities are attacked. Women and children are killed and raped. Women have become sex slaves. And the government is not able to stop it. It's not 1 year, it's not 2 years. It's gone on for years, and it has become worse between 2015 and 2020. I think the government needs to do more. Now, what should the international community do? I think that the international community should not just leave this as if this is a Nigerian affair. So let's just leave it for the Nigerians to sort themselves out. Nobody should get me wrong. I'm not saying the international community should intervene militarily to a sovereign country like Nigeria, because that has its multiplier effect. It's just going to create other problems. But diplomacy can do a lot, including the kind of diplomacy that will produce results. So we'll encourage the international community to see this also as part of their concern. Take the population of Nigeria, for instance, 200 million people. If Nigeria were to fall apart, just imagine the humanitarian crisis, the refugee crisis that will befall the world. The population of Nigeria, imagine just refugees pouring out of Nigeria, going into places like Benin Republic, Togo, Ghana. They'll just overrun those countries. And we'll end up with a much more serious social problem than we ever dreamt of. So I think that the international community should show a lot of interest and ensure that this kind of killings and violence and attacks against Christians does not continue in Nigeria. But I also think that the international community needs to work directly with local actors. I think that to get an accountable, independent, Muslim-Christian coalition group to work together to promote peace, but to also hold the governments in their own nations, particularly Nigeria, hold the government accountable is something that I would like to recommend and encourage. And that means that the international community needs to act not only with the government, but also needs to act directly with some of the key church leaders that are playing pivotal role in the area of peace building, and to work together with some of the Muslim leaders that really believe in promoting peace building. I would just say this: Leah Sharibu, the 16-year-old girl that has been in captivity till now, I'm involved in her advocacy, our Peace Foundation. Leah was picked up when she was 14. Because she picked up with other schoolgirls. They were released, but Leah was held back because she refused to deny her faith as a Christian. And so she's held against her belief in Christ. It's a humanitarian issue. It's a human rights issue. She's also held back because her education has been disrupted for 2 years now. She cannot continue in school. And we've been advocating and pleading to get Leah out. It will be 2 years next month. Leah is still in captivity. And there are others too that have been held in captivity. I think the international community, whether it's the business community, the government leaders, they need to find a way to work, put more pressure on the Nigerian government to ensure that those who are in captivity because of their faith are released.
Thank you.
Well, I would say when we consider the main factors and why this Islamist militancy is gaining ground across Africa and particularly in the Sahel region, it's a combination of factors. And one of them is about poverty. Like I said, all these countries are among the poorest in the world, and that's what has created a fertile ground for this Islamist group to eventually recruit young people. So how to deal with it? By creating perspective. They need a perspective, socio-economic perspective, this youth, these young people in that region. Most of the countries in the Sahel region, so the 5 of them working under a coalition, a network called the G5 countries, namely Chad, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania. The G5 is a comprehensive approach combining military and developmental activities to deal with the crisis. It's not enough to military intervene, but there's a need to do more about development, to provide more developmental project in that area, to support local activities, local economies in that area. That's one of the how to better fight against this Islamist insurgency. The government in that area, they are trying, they are doing their best, but it's not enough. They are overwhelmed. Local communities, local groups, particularly local churches, are also active. From the Catholic Church, for example, Caritas is active in all these countries, whether in Burkina Faso or elsewhere. In Burkina Faso, from the Protestant Church perspective, there's a special office for development. They are doing their best to provide relief material, to do developmental projects, but it's not enough because of the scale of the humanitarian crisis now. In Burkina Faso alone, 500,000 people displaced. They need to be relocated, they need food, they need assistance, and we have seen 300,000 children out of school. How to provide school for these children? It's a lot. A country like Burkina Faso, they can't do it, they can't afford, they don't have this capacity. And again, from the military perspective, they are trying, they are doing their best with the support of some foreign countries, and again, it's not enough. So there's more needs to be done to support local effort from the government perspective, but particularly from the churches' perspective, because churches are engaged, churches are doing their best to support the displaced people, but churches have also become a target. They are also affected.
Thank you. I take note that you mentioned Caritas as well as the Development Office of the Protestant Churches as interesting, maybe interlocutors or people to go to and to talk with. And I believe in both countries we should find such offices that we could discuss how we could be of support to their efforts to promote cohesion and also address the economic injustices and therefore also promote social cohesion. Now, Pastor Gideon, you mentioned as causes for this, as the multi-layered causes, you mentioned ethnic, religious, political, economic causes all flowing in and contributing to these problems. What about climate change? Knowing that, and this is a question for both my panelists, we know that at the WEF this year, at least, climate change was on the top of the conversations. What about, how do you perceive climate change impacting, or maybe not impacting, I don't know, the situation? How do you see efforts to combat the impact of climate change? And how, again, the business community and business leaders at the WEF can address this?
Thank you. I think looking at the fact that climate change effects is a reality globally, that I admit. As to whether that is directly impacting on the crisis in Nigeria, I have my struggles with that. I know that desert encroachment, it's a reality. But what we see is that even before climate change...
An encroachment, sorry to interrupt you, an encroachment of the desert?
Yeah. Maybe desert encroachment basically is that we have less vegetable lands from the desert. More and more, some of the greener parts of the north in Nigeria, it's becoming more and more desert right now. So that's what we use the term desert encroachment. Now, that has always been there. But, I mean, the crisis, the attacks have always been there, regardless of the deadly effects of the environment, climate change right now. So it's to say that there are other issues, but I wouldn't put climate change as a major issue being responsible for the crisis in Nigeria today. Rather, I think the factor of population, it's a big issue. Population growth, birth control, it's only on paper in Nigeria. A Muslim can marry up to 4 wives, and he can have as many children as possible. A Christian basically marries only 1 wife and less children. And so I have a friend who is a sheikh. I was shocked when we went to pay him a condolence visit when he lost one of his children, and he said he has about 45 children. 2 died, leaving 43. And believe it or not, he was saying he's ready to go to have more children. And I have only 5 children. When you have that kind of large numbers of children, and they have them lots. One person died, and his children and his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they were over 100. So when you have that, we have a lot of them that are moving southwards to the Christian areas in search of arable land to do farming. And because of that, we end up with clashes on our hands. And the target always end up being the Christians. And so in Plateau State, for instance, whole communities have been sacked and they've been taken over by some of these Fulani attackers. And that is a big issue. So yes, I've thought about climate change. We've argued it, but I wouldn't put it at the top, being responsible for the crisis. But I know it's real. And we can deal with climate change as it is, an issue of climate change affecting the world globally, but it should not become an excuse to allow the killings to take place in Nigeria.
Okay, Ilya.
Yeah, I would say in Sahel areas, climate change is one of the root cause of this crisis, and is affecting deeply all the countries in this belt, Sahel-Sahara region, from Burkina Faso to Senegal, all these countries. And we can see Sahara Desert is also gaining ground from north to south, more and more. And he talked about the demography. All these countries have the fast-growing population in the world, whether Niger, Burkina Faso, Senegal, or Mali. So that's a big a challenge. And some community, particularly nomadic community, living in that area have been deeply affected because they lost their resources, they lost their cattle, they lost everything. At that point, they become vulnerable. And that's why, if we consider people involved in this Islamist militancy, you will see some ethnic group, some category of the population are more involved in that, and they are the more affected by the climate change. So there's a correlation between climate change and this Islamist insurgency. Because of the porous, the particularity of this semi-desertic area, arid area, it's difficult for these countries to control the borders. The population are affected by that, and they have become vulnerable and easily recruited by Islamist group, because this Islamist group, they have a lot of money. This Sahara Desert has become now a route for different sort of traffic, whether human traffic, human being, migrant to Europe, whether a drug traffic from Latin America crossing Sahara Desert to Europe, whether weapons from Libya to across the rest of the Africa. So climate change has a huge impact. There's a lot to be done all over, but particularly in this Sahel, Sahara belt or countries who are now deeply affected. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to see if any of our attendees have any questions they would like to ask or anything they would like to clarify. We would love to hear from any of the people with us if they have any questions. There's a microphone in the back. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand. If there's anything that we would like to inquire about.
Which religion is chosen to support the children at school? So is the teachers, are there only Muslims, or you also have Christian teachers in the schools in these countries?
Yeah, okay. All the Sahel countries are predominantly Muslim countries, but they also have the particularity of having a small Christian presence. But like I said, churches in these countries are active through Caritas, through other Christian aid agencies. And they are deeply engaged in education sector. In Burkina Faso, for example, after the government, church-based schools are the second and are among the best, if not the best in the country. It's the same in Niger. It's the same in Mali. Churches are doing a lot and investing a lot in education. Education is a key factor to deal with this Islamist insurgency, because they are able to recruit because they have a particular message. But through education, we can turn it differently. Instead of letting them recruit young people, through education, you can send them another message, the good news to these young children, and more socio-economic perspective. So churches are doing a lot in terms of education, in terms of development, but like I said, it's not enough.
I'll just add by saying that one of the areas that this crisis has created a huge problem for the entire nation of Nigeria is in the area of education. In a number of the schools, we have Muslims and Christian students together. As we visited some of the areas and interacted with both Muslims and Christians, the truth is that Muslims were complaining that their children are out of school. The Fulanis, they can't go back to school because of the crisis. And the Christians are also complaining that their children are out of school. They can't go back to school. And so one of the areas in addressing this problem is to ensure that the insecurity comes to an end so that both children of Muslims and Christians can continue with their education. But proportionally, we have more Christian children in the affected areas out of school when you compare with the numbers of Muslim children who are out of school.
Thank you. Would there be any more questions from our attendees who would like to ask any question, clarify any area? I have one person.
Thank you. My question is, what are the skill sets that these countries need? Is it in the area of agriculture that would help them to farm better? Is it in the area of technology or energy resources? What are the practical skills that they actually need to learn and teach so they can grow in stability, but also within their economy?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Very helpful question, actually, along with the first one. Technology. It's one area many young people are drawn to technology. And that is a skill set, if it's used and they're trained, perhaps we see how they can use it positively. One thing we realize is that those who are in Boko Haram are very sophisticated technologically. They say Western education is forbidden, it's a haram. But ironically, they rely on Western education to prosecute their war. So there's a contradiction there. Now, how can we train young people to be able to counter that technologically? I think we need help in that area, and that's a skill set that many of the young people are drawn towards, so we can easily see how we can use technology to fight terrorism in Nigeria. But also agriculture. Our Peace Foundation actually is working on a proposal in which we want to have 50 young people, Muslims and Christians together, and encourage them to get into agriculture in order to grow more food, because this crisis also comes with a food crisis. But in addition, to be able to get them to work together so that the energies of young people can be turned towards more productive things than for them to become easy tools to be used by some of the people who use them for this crisis. And we also want to use that to show, depending on the funding, we're yet to get the funding, but it's something on paper, that both Christians and Muslims can work together for the good of the community.
Yeah, in the area affected by this Islamist insurgency, men are mainly, I would say, the victims. They are the one killed, targeted and killed, men, generally speaking. And in this area we know, and eventually in Western as well, men are the bread winner, providing food and everything. They are everything for the family. So in a family, when the head of the family, the man, is killed, So it means a lot for the whole family. It will make the whole family vulnerable. So how to deal with this kind of situation? Local churches, NGOs working on the field is by training women, how to train them, how to provide financial aid so that they can run small businesses, so that they will be able to provide food for the family and also for the youth, because they are also particularly targeted, how to provide professional trainings, socio-economic perspective. If they don't have any perspective, they have nothing to lose than to go and join these militant groups. That's the trap. So the best way to counteract this Islamist insurgency is by creating socio-economic perspective. More jobs, more schools, more small business for women, more socio-economic perspective for families. And the churches are really involved. They have the skills, the capacity to do it, but they don't have enough means to continue to provide because of the scale of the crisis now.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing about these opportunities that exist to support and to partner with locally with the churches and with the population. And as you mentioned, Pastor Gideon, with your own foundation, if there's a work with Muslims and Christians jointly. Are there any more questions from the attendees, or should we? I think this would be enough. This is we can come to the conclusion and the closure of our panel. Thank you, Ilya. Thank you, Pastor Gideon, for sharing with us. The challenges are truly tremendous, but as people of hope, as Christians, we believe that we should always endeavor towards peace, justice, and reconciliation. Amen. And thank you for sharing with us about the situation and about the opportunities that exist to progress and make things better. Thank you, and thank you for all our attendees, and until next year, I hope. Good day.